Welcome to the Real World Blockchain podcast, where we help businesses understand how cryptocurrencies and the blockchain industry can fuel their businesses. This episode is brought to you by Web3 Enabler, the first and only Web3 payment solution in Salesforce. I am Gauthier Lamothe, your host, and I'm here today with my three partners in crime: Niles Smith, our blockchain connoisseur; Zoe Braiterman, our tech expert; and of course Rebecca Kaplan, our UX and marketing specialist, who is at the airport at the moment, so she's kinda displayed as a correspondent, as if we were on a real TV show. Hi, guys.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Hello.
That's terrific. All right. So, first news, we're going to talk about a teeny tiny news about Venezuela. As you guys know, Venezuela had launched a few years ago a cryptocurrency pegged on a value of petroleum, of oil, basically. And that cryptocurrency was launched with great pomp and ceremony in 2018, if I remember correctly,
Right.
February, I guess. And it was backed by Venezuela's petrol reserves, and at the time it was priced at $60 per token. But due to many things, including economic sanctions from the US and other things, it was kind of complicated. So, have you guys heard about this cryptocurrency and the PTR? What do you think about that? About the project at the beginning?
Yeah, I heard about this getting launched back in 2018. I thought it was a really interesting foray for a government to have their own state-backed
Mm-hmm.
currency. And in a sense, it's a stable coin. It's pegged to a barrel of oil. And this was to combat the Bolivar's high inflation rate. However, it just never seemed to get traction inside or outside the country. And now the project is being sunset.
Yeah, I think that the private platform named Cryptoland, which is a Venezuelan platform, they wrote on their social media accounts last week the PTR, so the Petro, is officially dead. And it's quite interesting because that means that even when there's a stable coin, it's the same factor that determines the growth of a money of a currency, basically, which is trust. And the people had trust issues. How was your experience about that, Rebecca, in Venezuela? Have you got relatives who used that?
Yeah, so I think you hit something that's really important, which is the trust aspect. So it's crucial to understand the state that the country is in, Venezuela. So the people have lost all trust in their government. So while this was a really great idea and could have potentially helped them circumvent um, the restrictions that the U.S. is putting on the country, um, the people weren't going to get on board. They saw it as a risk, right? Because they did not trust them. I personally did not know any of my family members who used it, but I did hear about it in the country, and a lot of it was conversations around, oh, the countries that the government wants to further control them. So unfortunately, trust is so important, right? So, and with that you can't have it, even though it was a great idea and it could have been extremely beneficial for Venezuela, right? Venezuela was once the richest country in South America, and today inflation is nearly 500%. So this could have been a really good opportunity, but you can't have something like this succeed without trust.
Interesting. And it's interesting to see that it's not only happening to currencies pegged to something, forcefully pegged to something by a state or by a company. Sometimes it happens with Bitcoin as well. Sometimes just because there's a new regulation, people lose a bit of trust in Bitcoin and then lose interest in it and start selling their assets. Regarding that Petro PTR stable coin, the lack of trust was evident when I think Nicolas Maduro tried to revive the coin by ordering airlines flying from Caracas to use it to pay for fuel, and it became mandatory for state services such as getting new identity papers. So even with that lawful obligation, the currency didn't kick off. Did you, Zoe? Did you get some insight about the way it was technically programmed, or is it totally new to you?
Actually, not yet, but I also want to reiterate on those trust components.
And so, from a technical perspective, in your opinion, Zoe, what should be the biggest technical artifact that we should have in a cryptocurrency, specifically when it's issued by a state, in order to make it trustworthy for the people using it?
Well, I mean, history such as, lack of, significant technical issues. A lot of it is historic.
All right, so most of it is not really related to the technical aspects, but more to the personal feelings of the people using that, right?
Well, there is both. There's both, but I mean, there are design elements, but I think those kind of vary.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't looked into this one specifically, admittedly.
Well, no problem, but it's interesting because it's sometimes there might be one technical flaw that brings that, and it's quite funny because sometimes some projects that are poorly designed but have a great amount of carry a great amount of trust are still invested in by many people, even though they had a failure. So sometimes this happens.
I mean, one technical component in general is, the UX. Is the UX intuitive? Is it easy to use, or is it frustrating? Such that if you do have alternatives, you will, go elsewhere. So there's that. From security, whether or not it is hit is, also based on how adversaries are targeting.
Interesting.
So that's what I meant by, historical. Has it been breached? But then some of that has to do with kind of, adversarial energy put into the breaching. But, others are design flaws. Some of it are internal operations as far as how things are structured and when, for example, a credential might be exposed just due to the human element internally, if you will.
Interesting. So
there's a lot.
Let's hope that. Yeah. So sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, but yeah, I can't speak specifically to this one.
No problem.
Petro,
but that's interesting. Let's hope then that the people in charge of issuing CBDCs and so on learn from that lesson, and notably that it's not because you make it mandatory as a means of payment that people trust that money. You were about to say something, Niles?
Oh, yeah, and I was just thinking that Zoe was really highlighting something important of one, adoption of who is actually going to be using this, how are they going to be using this, and are you going to be able to buy your dinner? And with something such as a stablecoin, it's the redemption of, do you actually believe that something is backed, regardless of is it? Who is going to be the ones that are actually keeping that peg, because that's going to be arbitrage of people going and buying oil, using the Petro, or then redeeming the Petro for oil. But if you just tell them that, oh, this is equivalent to 1 barrel of oil, but there's no way to actually redeem that, then what does the token actually mean?
Yeah, probably nothing in this case. Well, that's interesting because you wanted to say something. You want to say something, Rebecca?
I was just gonna say, I love the conversations we're having here, and I keep thinking about how interesting it is that we're all kind of coming back to this idea of trust, right, and how important it is for there to be trust behind it. However, it's ironic because blockchain is supposed to be a trustless system where you don't necessarily need to trust the person you're interacting with because the blockchain is supposed to do that for you. But it highlights that when you're dealing with something that is pegged, that is, like USDC as an example that Niall made earlier, you have to trust the body behind it, right? And like he just mentioned, if you can't do that, then it kind of goes against some of the principles, some of the core principles of blockchain.
And Gauthier, I think like this is a great segue, if you're open to it, into getting into ETFs.
Yes.
And now this is a completely new wrapper of taking that something that is trustless, such as Bitcoin, and then putting it into our traditional finances. That then comes into another question of trust of, is it there? Can you actually redeem for the Bitcoin? And I think that was something that Grayscale, with their GPT Trust, had issues with, and was trading for a very long time under the value of a Bitcoin because there was only inflows. You were not able to bring anything out. And now it's like being converted into an ETF, which is supposedly going to be an easier vehicle to actually get that arbitrage and conversions possible.
Interesting. And because we're speaking about trust, let's talk about an entity that has been widely criticized, and many people have been writing the craziest theories and sometimes the most serious analysis about how trustworthy this organization is. I'm going to talk about the World Economic Forum. So if I tell you Davos and World Economic Forum, what do you guys think about? Let's play word association. What is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Elites.
Elites, all right. Zoe?
Yeah, I mean everything on the policy side essentially, and then making making claims about what they're doing from a societal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Each of the players, they of course want that, and some of it does have a solid argument, but you also have to, you always have to think critically and kind of decide for yourself what exactly is the truth versus what is mostly political.
Mm-hmm. And Rebecca?
Yeah, I was thinking rule makers, so very much aligned with counterparts here. So.
And so that's interesting because basically, allow me to to put all your words in a shaker and shake it. Basically, there's a tint of there's a taste of centralized power. Basically, when we're talking about the World Economic Forum of Davos, we're thinking about lawmakers and we're not thinking about decentralized economies. And surprisingly, despite what happened last year, despite the recent crypto winter, there are many cryptocurrency and blockchain companies that went to the Economic Forum. And nothing about the World Economic Forum really aligns with the idea of anti-establishment trade and commerce that could be fueled by cryptocurrencies. And yet, it's incredible, but there are many prominent crypto executives who went to the Davos Forum this year, and notably Ripple will be represented by a person at Davos, Brad Garlinghouse, and many other people are going to do that the same way. And it's interesting because also the Coinbase CFO has highlighted the significance of the SEC's decision to allow a Bitcoin ETF. So that's interesting because it means that the cryptocurrencies are getting mainstream in a very surprising way, because even the elites don't feel so much challenged by it. What do you think about that, Niles?
Yeah, I think that we need this advocacy. And to the point of Davos being the centralized elites and then cryptocurrencies and blockchains being for the people, it's important for us to have a voice. And what's interesting is the dichotomy of cryptocurrencies and blockchains being globalist. This is the first time we actually have currencies that around the world people are able to have a stake in and are allowed to use without central backed governments creating this stuff. And like this actually is in the ethos of Davos, regardless of if it's going to be a government or a nation state, or it's going to be these companies that are actually producing these projects that are now creating a completely new paradigm related to our financial systems that we, at least us on this podcast, and I'm sure our listeners are buying into.
So basically, dear listeners, if you were hesitating about whether cryptocurrencies are going to stay mainstream or not for the next few years, well, you have your answer. If this is discussed by the World Economic Forum and the SEC at the same time, it's probably here to stay. By the way, have you guys heard about the new debate regarding Coinbase and the SEC? So basically, the SEC was still in a litigious position, litigious stance regarding Coinbase because they said they are selling securities, and so that means they are operating as an unregistered exchange. And basically, the SEC attorneys made a reference saying that basically Coinbase is more like an ecosystem of people creating promotions and products around digital assets, but that they're not really considered as an illegal exchange anymore, obviously, but it's still in progress. We need to check that. But how optimistic or pessimistic are you guys regarding that?
Yeah, personally, I think that this is an amazing case. And I know that Coinbase is moving to dismiss, but this could be a great win for the crypto community, at least within the United States, if it does go to court and we actually get a ruling. And this allows us to then have regulation and guidelines where before right now, the SEC is regulating through enforcement with no clear guidelines. There are, I mean, like they've listed over 50 different cryptocurrencies as securities, but at the same time, they've lost their case against Ripple, where depending on how it was issued, that might be a security, but it's been ruled that it is not a security on the secondary market. And that is very much where Coinbase is playing, is they're not issuing anything new. And very clearly, like they have their new base layer 2 rollup, and that does not have a token of its own.
Also, that's interesting because there's a difference. Coinbase is not operating exactly like a trading platform where you sell pieces of stocks, well, you say fractions of stocks, because it doesn't give the buyers a right to take action if the issuer does a bad job. So you cannot basically sue Solana if you're not happy with the outcome on your investment. So there's, because you don't have any right to sue an assets issuer, you don't have an investment contract. So that's why probably, well, that's the exit door for Coinbase if they manage to pull this off. But that would also mean that cryptocurrencies are going to become a very legally known sector, and that means that it's probably going to also build up the level of trust for businesses that just were looking at that remotely. What do you think, guys?
Absolutely. And I think that maybe we want to just back up a little bit and just talk about the Howey test. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. Breaks out into 4 points of what is a security. It's an investment of money, common enterprise, expectation of profits, derived through the efforts of others. And that's sort of the key point that I think that you were hitting upon, where, yes, we want to make some money. We want this to go up. But at the same time, this is not something that we are able to hold the developers accountable of if the price actually moves one way or another. And maybe there will be securities that are issued on the blockchain. But the question now is, what about these native digital currencies that are being developed, and how are they different? And maybe we need a completely new regulation based on that doesn't fit what is currently available.
what I like about that is that the judge named Catherine Faya, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name, she noted that well, she's basically in a mindset where she wants stuff to regulations to be clean for the future and not something that will be painful to solve in the future. So I'm just going to quote her here because I have the quote on in front of my eyes. Basically, she said, "What matters is if some clever attorney can or cannot take my ruling and create new headaches for the courts." And I like it because
That's a great
that
quote.
means that she's trying to have a conclusion that is not going to be only for this case SEC versus Coinbase, but also about something a bit more. Well, she has a long-term vision, and I kind of like that. What do you think, girls?
I'll say that, like, I definitely think that the law should be clear. Like, it feels like we'll forever be coming back to this place of, like, are crypto securities or not until there's a very clear outline and definition of what it is. Obviously, this could change drastically the landscape. I'm almost at a place where, like, I'd rather know whether it's yes or no, because then we can move forward and we can kind of build around that regardless of the outcome, versus the place where we are now, where if you're in the States, you don't see them as securities because they really aren't. But the SEC does. So it's like this constant battle. Or like at any point, they can come in and shut your company down or like stall your business while they investigate, and just kind of not allowing innovation to continue the way that it should. So I'm all for definitely clear laws around it.
Well,
100%.
yeah. And so you,
The
Zoe?
part of clarity, yeah. It's about time.
And on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, to finish this episode, the European Union is going through another struggle. Basically, they are now trying to strongly limit the use of cryptocurrencies providing high levels of privacy, like Monero or tokens such as this one. And they are trying to do the same thing as what they are doing basically for cash payments. So they want to put a limit to self-custody wallets. Basically, will not be able to use self-custody wallets to pay more than $1,000 and €1,000, sorry, in a cryptocurrency transfer. Basically, the goal is to officially fight money laundering, or at least to fight fiscal evasion. We'll see what it holds, but I don't think that for businesses this is going to be something different, because in the B2B market we basically are used to total transparency and to clients who are already telling basically everything about their whereabouts to the state. So that's probably not going to change anything for businesses willing to set foot in the crypto world. What do you guys think?
Much good.
Niles?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that is an interesting take. To me, 1,000 sounds extremely low. That's something where you're not even going to necessarily be able to buy a gaming computer with that. That's really low. Maybe that's something where they're going to now be allowed to like do payments when you go and you pick up your lunch. But if you're doing real business to business transactions, now that's just adding another layer of bureaucracy. And it's funny that you mentioned that €1,000 threshold, because in another article, I believe that we shared, they mentioned that they are also looking at any transactions that are below €1,000 to try to combat terrorist financing. And it's like, okay, like, what do you want? Do you want people to do these small transactions and allow this for businesses? Or are you going to also have a completely another set of regulatory rules to look into what's going on when people are doing small transactions versus the large ones? And like, what's the point of this?
So indeed, probably not probably a small impact for businesses because they are already used to that level of bureaucracy anyway, right? So thank you for listening to the Real World Blockchain Podcast. Again, brought to you by Web3 Enabler. This episode and this episode's notes and disclaimers can always be found below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. You can join our community on Twitter, Discord, YouTube, Telegram, and follow exciting new updates every week by following us on YouTube. See you next week with more blockchain and crypto payment news.